Is a reality where you sign up for a 1-month JavaScript course, but you actually don't know what JavaScript is, and that's fine. That's why we are here. Maybe you heard it was cool, or somebody told you you should learn it, or it was just, I don't know, on sale. Who the hell knows? 1-month JavaScript is clearly where we are, but what is JavaScript? So in this video, let me just walk you through some context about the language that we're learning. And I think this will be important to you, even if you are coding JavaScript already. I just want to contextualize exactly what we're talking about. So what is JavaScript and why do I care? Okay, programming. JavaScript is a programming language. Technically, this is where stuff gets way geeky. Technically, it's a scripting language, but for all intents and purposes, who cares? Like, it's programming. Let's just call it a programming language. Right? We just want to do something with this, and it's code that we can do, and it's code that we can use to solve a problem, right? That's the important thing. This is something that I teach in my 1-month Programming for Non-Programmers course, is thinking about using code as a tool to solve problems, yeah? Cool. So programming, the definition is a set of instructions used to solve a problem. And I realize that's kind of dry and kind of boring sounding. So just to kind of like apply that to our lives, think about you solve problems all the time in your life. You have to make coffee, right? There's a set of instructions where you're like, I want coffee. I'm going to press buttons and get coffee or buy coffee. You think, I have to get to work. And then there's a set of steps. Get the keys, get in the car, buy a car if you don't have it, walk if you can, because that's awesome, or bike, even better. So there's all different ways that we can solve problems in our own life, and that is what we'll be doing week over week in this course. I will be setting these problems up for you. I'll be like, here's a problem. We want to get music from the internet and play it. How do we do that? And it's really more about conceptual thinking and breaking these things down into things that we're used to, like I said, like making coffee or going to work. How do we take things that we're used to in the real world and bring them into cyber world, whatever you want to call it. Okay, and that's where this language of programming will help us, and that's why we're using JavaScript. So how do I communicate an idea to a computer? That is really what we are doing here. We have ideas. You have ideas for something you want to build. You have an idea for something you want to do at your company, some data you want to grab, something you want to see, something you want to share, and we want to communicate that with a computer, and we'll be using JavaScript for that. Okay, front-end development. So JavaScript is part of the front-end development world, right? When we talk about front-end development, we are talking about 3 languages, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Only. There are only 3 front-end languages. There's not a 4th. There will likely never be a 4th. This is just the way it works because this is the way the browser works. So it's easy to remember that HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are the front-end languages, and back-end languages are pretty much every other language you've heard of, more or less, okay? So that's what we're working with here. That's why knowing some HTML and CSS is helpful coming into this, because as you will see, JavaScript more or less interacts with HTML and CSS with everything it does. So that's coming up. But this is something that's just an important takeaway to be aware of because I'll be using these terms. When we look at each of the languages of the front end being what you see in your browser, they each have a purpose, right? So we have HTML, which is the structure of the page. Just let that sit for a second. You don't need to overthink that. CSS is the style, and JavaScript is the behavior. So HTML is the structure, meaning it is the things that are on the page, the text that exists, an image exists, it exists is HTML. The style describes it. So the style is like it is a certain size or color, and JavaScript is kind of how it moves behavior if I click it and the actions that happen to it. Again, just let this pour over your head. You don't need to memorize this right now, but that is important to understand because they all have a certain function. Now let's get real world, okay? Trying to apply this to something that we know, I made this system where we look at each of them as being like a noun, an adjective, and a verb because it's really easy to talk about, right? If we look at HTML as nouns, CSS as adjectives, and JavaScript as verbs, we can have a conversation about real-world stuff. Look at this question here. Chris, can you make the logo bigger? What? What? I get this question a lot. I get questions like this. This is what drove me out of working in agency life. I used to work at agencies, an agency being, a big company of lots of developers and designers where we work on generally bigger projects. I worked with nonprofits for a while in DC, but I also worked up here in New York on we worked on the Bacardi, Black Eyed Peas website, the Toyota website. I worked on a bunch of really big websites, and there's like 20 developers all working on a project. And you get requests from the client, and the client often doesn't know how to code, and it's my job to go like, oh, what do they mean? What are they saying? And so we're going to go through that right now using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Got it? You and me. Let's do this. Okay. So Chris, can you make the logo bigger? Yeah. Okay. I know. You spent a lot of money on your logo. Yeah, I want to make it bigger for you. We're going to be a really nice developer. Yeah. Okay. I think that would be a good idea. We'll make that logo bigger. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So how do we do that? What I think of when that happens is looking at the logo. If we say that HTML is the noun, right? HTML is the thing on the page. We can look at this and say, yeah, make the logo bigger. Making that logo in the page is going to be coding with HTML, and making it bigger is the style. It's like the adjective. It's the idea of making it bigger, right? So making a logo on the page, you could put a logo on the page with HTML. The sizing of it is best done with CSS, and that's how we work it. Let's do one more, okay? So hey, Chris, can you make the gray heading fade in? Okay, that sounds reasonable. So we have a blog, I imagine, and the heading, the thing at the top, the text at the top of the blog post, the heading, we want that to fade in. I'm gonna give this over to you. Here, what do you do with this? Which one is the HTML, which one's the CSS, and which one's the JavaScript? If you're looking at it, you will think heading is the noun, right? So the heading, the idea that there's some text on the page, is going to be the HTML. The gray, the idea that it has a color, is the adjective, the CSS, and the fading in is the JavaScript. And that's why I'm showing you this example right now, because it's the JavaScript that we're going to be using that's going to have the interactivity on the page. It's going to have the events of clicking on something and having something else happen. It's going to have, when things load and data loads asynchronously and all this kind of stuff, that's the JavaScript. It's the verb, it's the actions, it's the behaviors, it's the really cool, sexy stuff going on all over the page that you get really excited about, right? So that's the JavaScript part. And they all work together is really the purpose of this. All right, so that is JavaScript. That's how it works together with HTML and CSS, and it is all part of the front-end development languages. Yeah, so that's what we're going to be doing. On to the next video.